Welcome back to Behind the Front Lines, and in today's video we're going to be having a look at the front lines once again and have a look at the latest on the Ukrainian counter-offensive. Haven't seen too many territorial changes today, but there have been many reports of attacks and some positional changes as well, and we will have to see what will happen over the coming days and the coming weeks as this offensive is beginning to ramp up. We've gone from the probing attacks we've seen over the past few weeks and past few months to now larger units and large areas of troops being used, and now we are starting to see some more advances. Just no major changes today. The only territorial change officially from the deep state map today is actually in the north. This is very good signs for the Ukrainians that they have pretty much pushed back much of this Russian force that did cross this river and made some advances towards this line of village on the Svatove front. You can see here that two villages, Novo Gorivka and Nadia, have now been re-liberated, and we have seen Nova Horivka has apparently actually also been liberated once again, although only held by the Russians for a number of days. These three villages have been taken once again, and the only village from this push to be under Russian control is Serhivka here, but this is a matter of a few hundred meters from the river, so very much was right on the front line in the first place. So you can see this blue dotted line here, and this is where the initial front line was around 10 days ago. The Russians pushed all the way beyond Nadia, getting close to Kapanki here, and took these two villages as well, but progressed further as well. But now that was turned to grey zone over the last couple of days, and now is showing being retaken by the Ukrainian forces. Now the Russians still do hold a small bridgehead across this river here and have still made advances from what the front line was a couple of weeks, about 10 days ago. And if we do look on the map here, you can see maximum gains of around 3 kilometers here, and along the front actually smaller. This is the maximum point, and of course, as I said, actually I believe the front line is actually further eastwards than this, so maybe under 3 kilometers. So pretty minimal advances made here of pretty irrelevant territory. To be honest, much of the heights is to the west here, so they have gained some more lowland areas, a little bridgehead, but not a large enough bridgehead to create pontoon bridges and to transport heavy equipment across without being under Ukrainian artillery fire. Now that is the thing with this bridgehead. It was an attempt to create a large enough area of land that the Russians would be able to transport some heavy equipment across this river without being under the fire of Ukrainian artillery. So the plan was to get maybe a 5 to 10 kilometer buffer towards these villages, and that will mean that these areas are under fire from certain long-range artillery, but from most of the artillery wouldn't be able to reach it. But that seems like it has failed. This assault was mainly infantry based, but it was a large infantry attack. But it is good news that it has been pushed back, and it is looking highly likely now that it has been pretty much thwarted. They may consolidate some of these territorial gains, but we're not expecting anything too major here unless they do send significant reinforcements. But reports are they don't have too much in terms of significant reinforcements because of what is going on elsewhere on the front line. They could commit those 100,000 troops they have along this front line, but that probably would be a bad mistake, as the Ukrainians would capitalise elsewhere, as they've still got thousands and tens of thousands of troops in reserve, ready not only to capitalise on breakthroughs perhaps towards Bakhmut, but in the south as well. Now, if you progress down to Bakhmut, there have been no official territorial changes today, but reports are that the Ukrainians have made larger advances towards Kurdymivka here, and that this will be imminently under huge strain, as not only the Ukrainians can fire across the canal here, but they've now got a land bridge to the north to push the infantry fighting vehicles in, and then have, of course, fire supports. So Kurdymivka is in a very dire situation. Most likely, the Russians will withdraw to Selenopilia, or perhaps even further eastwards towards further trench networks I'm assuming they have built out in these fields. Reports also that the Russians have left Andriivka, not officially under Ukrainian control, because the reports are that they've crossed just over the railway line towards some outposts, some trench networks here nearby to the river. I've got some fortifications here, so the Ukrainians can't enter Andriivka without being under intense fire. But regardless, Andriivka, from the sounds of it, is now more in a grey zone. Expect that to be updated over the next few days. And Klishchiivka, fierce battles are continuing on the outskirts here. As I said in yesterday's video, the Ukrainians have almost just taken a bit of a lull in assaulting Klishchiivka because it's not worth the troops at this stage. The Russians are continually pushing reinforcements in, and the Ukrainians, holding all the heights around it, are able to hit this town with huge amounts of artillery fire and mortar fire, decimating all these Russian reserves. So it is a bit of a meat grinder for the Russians at this stage, but they unfortunately have to keep all these troops in here, because if they did leave and go to the other side of the railway line like they're doing in Andriivka, then the Ukrainians can make quite a large advance in a very short space of time. They don't want a rout going on this front, because if the Ukrainians got close to or even towards got fire control over this road from Epitne into Bakhmut, then very likely that supplies would be cut off in this region. And that's where you could start to see some real significant advances, multiple kilometres in a short space of time, if that did happen. So Klishchiivka is vital to hold on to, and at the moment the Ukrainians are pretty content in just holding the surrounding area and basically bombarding all the Russian conscripts and reservists who are just sat in Klishchiivka trying to hang on. Now, across to the southern front, we have not seen any major territorial changes, but there's been plenty of reports, and I'm assuming the maps are going to be very, very, very careful with their updates, as it is a very volatile front at the moment. But all the reports from the Robotyne, Orikhiv area down towards Tokmak of significant advances from the Ukrainian troops, or at least significant assaults. And we still haven't seen an update in a number of days, actually, from this region. But reports are that reserve troops were called up towards Verbove and have stabilised the line in this grey zone. So we're expecting this to be updated very soon, most likely pushing the red further northwards and westwards, but also pushing the blue of Ukrainian liberated territory further eastwards as well. Somewhere within this grey zone, the front line is now here as well. And there have been reports the Ukrainians are continuing to try to assault through this small area of grey zone here towards the east of Robotyne, and they're getting counterattacked as well by those reserves. So it is one of these situations where the Russians keep having answers for the Ukrainian assaults, but at some point those answers will run out. They won't have unlimited reserves, and these reserves will have to be concentrated in places, and at some point, with the pressure ramping up, it is going to break, and we are going to see either the Ukrainians get held, i.e. they run out of force against the reserves, or the Russian reserves run out and we see a breakthrough. Those are the two scenarios that I'm expecting over the coming weeks. I would go more towards the side of the Ukrainians making a breakthrough, simply because they haven't pushed all their troops to the front line. They've still got about 10 to 20,000 troops still in reserve, waiting for that breakthrough, with more sophisticated NATO weapons, Western weapons, ready to push wherever we do see a significant breakthrough through the lines of defence. And the Russians, it is unknown how many reserves they do have, but reports, of course, continue to come out that they are struggling for troops in the grand scheme of it, not on the direct front line, but if the Ukrainians did make a breakthrough somewhere, then they don't have a lot remaining to the south of these lines of defence. So again, this will be updated, continuing over the next few days, and I do think the front line is roughly like this, but most likely much more intricate and much more volatile, and we will have to see if these Ukrainian assaults make more progress and whether they do deplete those reserves in the coming days to see a more significant breakthrough towards Tokmak. Now, the last area where we probably will see some significant changes over the coming days is towards the Vilka Novosilka area, where we have seen Staromorsk liberated in the last few days. Reports are that the Russians launched a counterattack, retaking some of the positions near the river here. But reports are still that Ukrainians are with Staromayorsk. So it sounds as though the Russians have basically turned the south of the village into a bit more of a grey zone, which is not that much of a problem for the Ukrainians, as they are unlikely to make straight advances from Staromayorsk because of the river here. It's going to be very difficult to make direct assaults towards the south here. They're much more likely to go back out through the fields here. So not really a problem. The Russians retaking some of this territory towards the south, but they've not recaptured Staromayorsk. Anyone saying that they've recaptured it is not the truth. They have perhaps recaptured some positions to the south that they had voluntarily withdrawn from when the Ukrainians were assaulting, and it is now just a waiting game to see where the Ukrainians assault next. The reports again of advances towards Pryotny, towards the north here. Again, uncertain to say exactly where they've gotten to. They are pretty much on the periphery of Pryotny now. I suspect this area of land will be changed very soon because Staromayorsk is liberated, because these areas toward the north of Pryotny are under control. This pocket here could be operationally encircled, as there's only a very small region here to get supplies to these trench networks. So I do suspect that we will see withdrawal from some of these troops in the coming days from the looks of this. Unless we see a Russian major counterattack, it does look likely that we'll see big changes here. And perhaps the fall of Pryotny very soon if the Ukrainians can get round to the east and the west. They'll be able to bypass the natural barrier of this river, and of course there'll be many Russian positions here, making it a very difficult task, impossible really, for any major equipment to get across because of this river. So that's why they're probably waiting to go around to the east and the west here, but they first need to take this land. The first steps of that was encircling it more by taking Staromayorsk. The last part of this front that is going to probably dynamically change very quickly over the coming days is this region from Urzyne towards Novodonetsk. Now, Novodonetsk was one of the first villages to be assaulted in the counteroffensive back in June, and it was captured by the Ukrainians before being recaptured by the Russians in a counterattack. And since, it's been pretty much just about controlled by the Russians, with the grey zone just near these rivers to the north and the west. But the problem is now not only that the Ukrainians are starting to fire upon it or starting to look at assaulting it, they're actually bypassing it really and cutting off supplies, operationally encircling it. Now, Novodonetsk has no supply roads to the east. Of course, you could go through some of these fields, but I'm assuming a lot of these fields are filled with mines, so it's not optimum for supplies. The only supply road is to the south, and the reports are that the Ukrainians have made more significant advances in this area of fields. The deep state map we're looking at now is pretty conservative with these advancements. Other maps have the advancements a couple of kilometres further southwards than this, even prior to the last couple of days. And the reports are that Urzyne, as I saw in yesterday's video, is pretty much operationally encircled. And really their last hope of holding on to Urzyne was this counterattack in Staromayorsk, which inevitably did fail in retaking most positions. It took back a couple, but this still essentially means that Urzyne is going to be assaulted from the north, the west, and the east, and will likely imminently be liberated. Probably not by a direct assault, but more likely from just simple Russian withdrawals, because it's an untenable situation. And it's looking likely now from the reports that Russians are calling up their reserves to Staromayorsk, that they're going to next set up a defensive line along these villages here towards Kermenk, Staromayorsk, Volodine, Ramivka, up towards Stepove, this sort of line here, where we have got some water features, again, natural barriers. This is going to be the next line of defence, and that could perhaps mean that the Russians are just about holding on, and we're going to withdraw from Pryotny, Urzyne, and Novodonetsk very quickly. Another report is coming in that actually the Ukrainians, again, it's difficult to say because these are coming from frontline sources. It's difficult to say exactly what they mean by this, as a lot of the time it is translated to English. The reports are that they have reached this supply road. Whether that means that troops are actually on this supply road in these fields here, or whether they are, about half a kilometre away or a kilometre away to the west, and have got fire support or fire control, over this road, essentially meaning any supply trucks will be fired upon quite swiftly. Unknown to say exactly what is to do with that, but regardless, whether it is troops near that road or whether it is just artillery in close proximity, it does make this position untenable as well. So I am anticipating some quite big changes in the next few days. The reason why we're not seeing updates at the moment is because it is so volatile, so quickly changing territory. And I also think the Russians are trying to hold on to these 3 villages, basically trying to hold on for the next few days before they eventually withdraw to a more secure defensive line further southwards. And that's why we're seeing such a sort of chopping and changing front line here, where it's all over the place, and it will be flattened out very quickly with the withdrawal of those troops. But of course, that is something we need to see over the coming days, and Ukrainians will need to continue to put pressure on to force that change and not allow any Russian counterattack in the next couple of days. So we'll see what happens. It's looking like a very dynamic situation, but does look like this front line is very imminently going to see some big changes. These lines of villages along this river continue to fall into Ukrainian hands. This is going to be the 5th village Urozhaine along this position. Actually 6th if you could include Storozheve there. We'll have to see how quickly that progress is made and whether the Russians try and hold on for as long as possible, or they do have an orderly withdrawal from Prudne, Urozhaine and Novodonetsk. But it does look like their position here is getting untenable. So we've got our main vectors in Zaporizhia, and it'll be very interesting to see how this does progress over the coming days. As I keep saying, the Ukrainians still have got their main thrust in reserve. They're putting more troops to the front. They're putting larger assault units together, using company-sized assault units. They are ramping up, but it is still yet to be fully committed. The reserves of the NATO-trained troops are yet to be fully committed to the front line. Until that happens, we cannot say for certain how much progress the Ukrainians will make on their mission towards Berdyansk, Mariupol, and Melitopol over the coming weeks. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you have enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you again for another update in the next few days.